Hey everyone. So, unlike the other videos on my channel, which are kind of a mix of what I'm thinking at that moment and a little bit of psychology mixed with art, I wanted to get a chance to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to me and that doesn't have to do with like this intellectual, psychological debates, at least not for the most part. And that's the hyperfixation of photorealism. And I'm going to get into that for a bit. What I wanted to start talking about, first of all, is my art and how I kind of progressed through my very small so far art journey. Now, when I started out, I was very fond of drawing animals, so if I find any photos, I'll put them on the screen. But I drew a lot of animals, and as far as I know, the only goal when drawing these animals was to copy the photo as best as possible. Now, this went on for a very long time. In fact, it went on about to a year ago, and there wasn't anything inherently wrong with this, but it basically all that art was to me was seeing a really cool photo and trying to replicate it to the best of my abilities. Now, if you follow my Instagram page where I actually don't post as much as I should, you'll see that I've kind of shifted away from this wildlife painting to kind of more a classical approach. You can see I have a plaster cast behind me, which will serve me very much because I am still completely unaware of the concept of planes and surfaces when drawing, but that's kind of beside the point. What I wanted to say is that I've been shifting more towards classical art. And so it is very much safe to say that my tastes have changed a lot within the past year, and I'll get into a bit of about why my tastes have changed. But what I wanted to talk about most, and what the majority of this video will be, was my observations of how people treat different types of arts. And it's funny because I still deem that I am kind of evolving in my art, and in fact, I have just started with my art journey, and I'm very much still kind of like that clay that you have to mold into something. And I'm still at the beginning of my journey. I know that what my art will look like in 5 years down the line has nothing to do with what it looks like now. But what I've realized is that when my whole life I've painted all these and drawn all these super realistic photos of tigers, lions, bees, anything really for that matter, all I got was praise. Like it would just be so incredibly awe-inspiring to so many people just to see like, oh, you drew this tiger and you drew with all these little hairs and all this kind of fur texture, and you can see every little pore on its nose. And I could just see that people didn't have this like fake shock. It was very much like incredible to them. It was like, how on earth do you do that? And I had extreme feelings of satisfaction when people would tell me these things. I would, it would boost my ego a lot. And I kind of felt good about those things for a long time, but it kind of got boring to me because it was very one-dimensional in the sense that there was nothing more to just copying a photo. And so I've reached out, I've kind of started drawing people now. I want to do mythological works. I want to do works inspired from the Bible, from ancient stories. That's kind of my theme right now. And a lot of what I've learned in my very humble experience in classical painting and drawing so far is that kind of less is more, in the sense that you can't really draw details before you have the whole. And the whole just means a basic construction of anatomy, of muscles, and how the skin overlaps these things. And I very much learned that I am completely inept in seeing the underlying structure. And so I've been kind of letting go in my approach. I've been trying to just simplify things. Simplify is a great word because more isn't necessarily better, even though it can be. But what I noticed ever since I kind of started experimenting with my art and I've been studying a lot of the Renaissance masters, the Baroque masters, the French Academy artists, American Academy artists, just a lot of these kind of different painters throughout history. What you'll notice is that even painters that lived in the 1800s, 1900s, and had the ability to copy a photograph, they still didn't, and the art, in my opinion, looked way better than it does now. And the reason that is because our imagination is much better than a photograph. And if your only goal in a painting is so that it looks better than the photograph, you will fail every single time, because you will never make it better than the photograph itself unless you put your own artistic touch. And I kind of realized that many of the works praised by extremely knowledgeable people isn't really detailed work. Like if you look at the works of Bouguereau, there is so much more that goes into it rather than just trying to capture as many tiny hair follicles as possible. There is the subject of composition. There is the subject of edges. You know, some of his edges that were in focus were much sharper, and some of his edges that were kind of out of focus were very much blurred and you couldn't see them well. There was the subject of light. You know, the thing that was most important in the painting was usually lighter than the rest of the painting. And so it was so much more than just seeing what you see and trying to make it look as realistic as possible. And I've come to really admire artists that kind of had this more loose style, because when I always started my journey, don't get me wrong, this has nothing to do with abstract art or anything. I still like realism. It's just that you see the masses kind of all they like in terms of art is it to be as photorealistic as possible. And I'm really not hating on anybody here. If it works and if you can make a living from it, you know, all power to you. But in my opinion, you know, the masses just don't have real knowledge of what good art is. You know, they'll see a super up close photo of a woman, like with honey drooling down her face. You see so many artists do that. And again, I'm not hating on them. I'm not hating on anybody actually, but I recognize that the people that appreciate that art haven't explored other subject matters. You know, they've exclusively seen that and they're like, you know, that's what I want. Anything more than that and I'm not interested. And to get back to what I was saying, you'll see this like photo of a woman with honey dribbling down her face, and it's just like the most realistic skin texture. You can see like every single pore, every single acne scar, every single hair follicle. You can see the creases on her lips. You can see the reflection of the honey dribbling down her face. But even with all that, it's still very one-dimensional. There is zero composition. There is zero contrast between the lights and the darks. There is zero kind of, you know, organizing the subject matter in a coherent manner, which again goes back to composition. There is zero depth behind the work in the sense that there is no actual intellectual meaning. The intellectual meaning is derived from the viewer, which in my opinion can mean whatever. So does it have a universal meaning or does it have no meaning at all? It's just very much one-dimensional to me is the best way I'd put it. And you see most people in most spheres of life appreciate the one-dimensional things, you know. I'm an avid cheese connoisseur. That's a bunch of BS. I just like cheese basically. And so I've come to recognize that most people love store-bought cheddar, and my whole life I've loved store-bought cheddar. But ever since I've kind of learned about cheese making processes and the different textures and consistencies and tastes, I've come to love the more exotic cheeses. Like I love sheep cheeses especially, you know, whether it's pecorino or it's a softer blue cheese. You know, I love these kind of more cheeses that most people would basically barf if they took a bite out of. Well, not for pecorino, but like for the blue cheeses and like the soft creamy cheeses that are also made from like a type of mold. And my point being is that most people just like the generic store-bought thing, and the same thing is happening with art, where the trend is hyper-realism, and you'll see all these hyper-realist artists get millions of views. Like, you know, the more details, the more views. It's literally linear. But you'll see these like amazing artists that are, in my opinion, and again, it's open for interpretation, I could be wrong, in my opinion, are of better quality than the hyper-realist artists, get only a couple hundred views, Now, of course, this has to do with marketing. You know, many great artists just simply don't post their work, whether they do hyperrealism or not. Like they make a post once a year. But on average, a hyperrealist artist will be way more successful on these social media apps than your typical realist traditional painter. And I think that's because the masses are simply uneducated on what is actually quality art. There's no kind of standard anymore. There's no like limits of deviation. Everything is open and everything is available, and so the masses kind of pick what they want the most, and what they want the most is hyperrealism, which again is kind of, in my opinion, very much limited to what the eye sees and what the photo sees in that moment. And so I kind of don't know what the point of this rant is, other than the only way to kind of fix this problem is to actually educate the masses, which is very hard because most people that want to educated on art will educate themselves regardless of if the education is necessary or not. So yeah, my kind of conclusion is that I just think that hyperrealism isn't really the ultimate art form. It's a very much new thing that's been up and rising in the 2000s, but throughout history, people have been trying to be realistic as possible, but art has lost so many dimensions. Nobody is paying attention to composition anymore. Nobody is paying attention to perspective anymore. Nobody is paying attention to color theory, to their balance of sharp edges and lighter edges, to dark values and lighter values. Art has just become me see these pores, me draw these pores. Me see these creases in your clothes, me draw these creases of your clothes. It's kind of like becoming human photo printers. And the irony in all of this is that my biggest success on Instagram were reels that were hyper realism. Like I got like 8 million views, I think, on my tiger painting that had like drawing of the white tiger. I'll put it up on screen. And so you would think that I would just kind of continue that, but I don't know. It just really, I think there's so much more to art than just becoming a human photo printer. And this is coming, like I said, from somebody who started with hyperrealism and whose only goal was to achieve hyperrealism, and who didn't even want to look at other types of art because I was like, if it isn't hyperrealistic, it simply isn't good enough. You know, it's just a skill issue with the artist. But I've come to see that, you know, Michelangelo wasn't hyper-realistic on purpose. I kind of doubt that he never achieved hyperrealism. I just think he never looked for it in the first place. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like I said, this is a topic that's completely open for debate. At the end of the day, people have different tastes, but on average, like I said, most people simply won't have tasteful opinions. Just like most people that buy store-bought meat won't really appreciate grass-fed meat, even though it is better. But people simply don't realize that because there is a lack of basic knowledge and understanding for most things in life. But like I said, let me know your comments and the thoughts below, and I'll see you next time.